Okay. House Energy Policy Committee will come to order. Welcome, everybody. Mr. Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Chairman Glenn.
Here.
Representatives Hout.
Here.
Barrett. Cole. Tedder. Bellino. Barrington. Griffin. Johnson. LaFave. Lauer. Riley. Lisinski. Dianda. Garrett. Camilleri. Elder. Green. Sneller. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Vice Chair Houck moves we approve the minutes of the last meeting without objection so ordered. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you this morning. We have time constraints. My apology to the committee members and to those who have come to testify for the relocation and the shifting times. That in itself was an attempt to accommodate both sides of the issue. I'd made a commitment to opponents of this legislation to have an additional hearing with at least 30 days notice. The proponents wanted to have one prior to the break before the election, so this was the only day possible. We were initially scheduled from 9 to noon, and then as often happens on the last day before a recess, we find that we are going on the floor for session at 10 o'clock instead of at 12 o'clock. Has nothing to do with this legislation. So we have now from 8:15 until 10 o'clock to hear testimony, consider amendments, et cetera. Here's what's going to happen. Anyone who has testified on this issue before in the previous hearing or hearings, we're going to have them set aside until individuals who've had an opportunity to testify for the first time have done so. We're going to go back and forth, pro and con, and we're going to limit everybody's testimony to no more than 5 minutes. I know that some people have come in from out of town. We apologize that we're going to constrain you to 5 minutes, but we are going to do so. And members of the committee have asked for the opportunity for about the last 20 minutes to themselves have discussion on the issue amongst ourselves. That doesn't happen very often, so I certainly want to encourage it and perhaps offer amendments and consider those. So with that, the first panel of witnesses, and folks, this will be Phil Bertolini with Oakland County, Assad Terse with Wayne County, Dennis Kolar with the Road Commission for Oakland County, and Ed Noyola, County Road Association of Michigan. And gentlemen and whoever, you have 5 minutes collectively to testify. You may use that time however you wish, and will be followed by questions from the committee. My objective today is to have the opportunity for as many people as possible to testify. But obviously under these time constraints, that's not going to be a whole lot. If you are for or against, you have the opportunity to put cards in indicating your support or opposition. Gentlemen, you know the drill. Push the button, and we're looking forward to your testimony.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Bertolini. I'm the Deputy County Executive and CIO for Oakland County. You do have a letter from our County Executive as well as the County Executive of Wayne County explaining some of the issues we have. There's really 3 things we're working on. One, the issue of local control over these right-of-ways. We've taken great, painstakingly taken efforts to make sure we keep these right-of-ways in pristine condition, as well as have the ability to go ahead and put technologies and infrastructure in them if needed. So we're concerned about that. But what we're really concerned about is the cost that's associated with this issue. We are going to have to subsidize this effort with our road money. The bill that is presently before you does not have enough dollars in it in recouping of cost for the work that's going to have to be done by local government to inspect these assets and approve these assets to be permitted. So we're very concerned with that, and we would appreciate if you would give us some time to work with the legislature and or the folks on both sides of the bill to see if we can't work out what we need to do with those rates longer term. I will now yield to the gentleman from Wayne County.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee, for allowing us to speak. On behalf of Wayne County, I'm Assad Terse, the Chief of Staff for the Wayne County Executive's Office. One of our main issues, and we're going to hear from my partners there in Oakland County, is let the market set the rate. There is in the bill, there is a fee associated with the installation of these devices that local municipalities could recoup. As a municipality, municipalities have a right and a responsibility to maintain the right-of-way of the constituents that they serve. We don't feel that the $20 to $30 rate that's in the bill is sufficient to maintain that right-of-way. We don't know how big of an industry or 5G is going to be, but from what we hear from the communication companies, it's going to be a pretty big thing in the wave of the future. We are supportive of the technology. Yes, we're just in opposition of the bill. We would like every municipality to be able to negotiate their own contracts. Currently, we have a contract that's negotiated with Neo Networks that will ultimately pay us approximately $1,500 per site per location. What does that mean? That means ensuring that we have enough money that we are collecting from an industry that is presumed to be very lucrative, and that we're getting our fair share in what municipalities have. We have a right to maintain the right-of-way. We have a right to maintain the right-of-way of where these devices will ultimately go on. And ultimately, if we don't have enough money, that money is going to come out of our general fund, which will, our road fund and other areas that will help pay for some essential services that we have a right to the constituents, such as infrastructure, roadways, and bridges. I'd like to turn it over to Oakland County. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dennis Kolar. I'm the Managing Director of the Road Commission for Oakland County. Just real briefly, the Road Commission's been a leader in technology. We have the second largest adaptive traffic control system. We're familiar with technology. We support what's the intent of Senate Bill 637, but like my partners here, we're concerned about what it costs. As I read the bill today, I will have to use my Michigan Transportation Fund revenue to subsidize inspecting the installation, ensuring the installation's right of these small cell facilities. So what does that mean? That means every time a resident of Michigan fills up their tank or pays a registration fee, a small portion of that is going to be used to subsidize these large companies. I just read yesterday that Verizon is releasing 5G in 4 cities. The cost of that is $70 a month or $50 additional on your regular cell phone bill. But yet this bill says we'll give the local governments $20 a year if we co-locate on your traffic signal pole. I think it's pretty easy to see a reasonable person would say there's something wrong with that rate. We have over 1,500 intersections. We have 4 signal poles at least at each intersection. Co-location would be multiple users, multiple cell providers. I'm going to have to hire staff to manage this. I will have to hire an electrician to inspect it. I'm going to have to somehow maintain how do we bill these folks. This is fraught with additional costs for local agencies that will be subsidizing billion-dollar companies with public dollars. And I'm not here to say that we don't have a solution. As mentioned, there's a company called Neo Networks. We have a non-exclusive agreement with them. They've inventoried our vertical assets, and we have an agreement with them, and we have an agreement with Sprint for 250 locations. I've been signing leases for the past couple months with Sprint. So there is a way out. We believe that the model we have in Oakland County and what's happening in Wayne County is something this committee should look at. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Noyola, and thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony.
Thank you.
And Representative Riley has a question.
Yeah, to anyone out there, have in the past, with any agreements from the state like this or bills from the state, have we seen anything that this broad and it goes after local control on issues that when it deals with the road right-of-ways? Is this typical, would you say, or would you say it's more far-reaching than?
Well, the last bill that this House passed was House Bill 5097, dealing with the telecommunications. So that would be The previous one before that, no. But if you look at what's in House Bill 5097, the bill sponsor was able to work with us. We were able to recoup our inspection fees. We were able to get a proper bid deposit. There's lots of things in 5097 that could be used in 637. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Lisinski has a question.
Thank you. So as I'm looking at Senate Bill 637, I searched the word inspection. It speaks to permits. Can you tell me where it excludes you from charging an inspection fee for safety or other purposes to recover your cost for that? Where do you see that that's excluded in the legislation?
I will respond with that by saying it doesn't allow us to do that. There's nowhere in the bill that says we can do that.
Where does it say? What I'm wondering is, does the bill explicitly say you can't do that? So when you're working in the right-of-way and you have to inspect a pole or provide an inspection, to me that's different than a permit fee. Is there a place in here that says you will not be allowed to do those inspections? I'm just wondering, because
No.
to me a permit versus an inspection versus those fees are two separate things.
Well, let me explain a little bit, at least how we work this at the Road Commission for Oakland County. When a contractor brings in a set of plans, a utility, a small cell company, we look at what's proposed by their subcontractor. We establish a permit fee that's going to be based on what we think the inspection fee is. So there is a one permit fee, then on top of that is what we believe the inspection fee is. And then the project proceeds. And if there's any money left over, we return that.
That includes reviewing the plans. That also includes any pre, during, and post-construction of the site to make sure that the safety of the motoring public is there, and to make sure that any utilities that are existing there are also protected, as well as their contractors, their employees. So we're out there on a regular basis just to make sure that it's being properly installed, it's safe, and it's in its proper location. So those are costs that the road commissions will have to incur, the road agencies will have to incur throughout the installation.
And if I could also, Representative, we do agree with the technology. We want the technology. We just need to make sure that the costs are being recouped. If there's some way to put those inspection fees into the bill, we're very amenable to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's just not clear in the bill that is something
Well,
that
that's what's not clear to me in the bill, that is prohibited for you to charge or conduct inspections for safety and to recover your costs. What I see here is a permit fee, which is a look at the plan fee to me, not these are then the things that have to be done to ensure safety fee.
And the only concern, Representative, is that it's not specifically stated in the bill, we'll end up in some sort of litigation over whether we can charge them or not. So if someone would put an amendment to that, we'd be much appreciative.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Halk has a question.
Yeah, I just have a question for Oakland County. You said how you want the free market to work, but don't you already have an exclusive agreement with one individual? I mean, how can the free market work if we have if you already have an exclusive agreement with one individual? And secondly, I just think if we were talking, all the new technology that comes out, we have issues with it. But could you imagine if we were just bringing electricity out? And we wanted every individual municipality to be able to say to consumers or DTE or the local co-op, this is how much you're going to charge here, and this is how much you're going to charge there. I just wonder what your...
I can respond to that. Representative, maybe I misspoke in my testimony, but when I mentioned our agreement with Neo Network, our third-party administrator, it is specifically non-exclusive. Another company can come in and do the same thing. So it is not.
I mean, how can it be free market? Because the county is setting the rate, the market is not setting the rate, right? I mean, so if they come into Oakland County for, say, what is it, $1,500 a pole? Say they go into my county for $100 a pole. My citizens are going to have cheaper access to this than they are going to have in Oakland County. So how is free market? I guess I'm confused on how free market is working.
So if you don't mind, I could help answer that. So what we're saying is allow the municipalities, every municipality, the rate in Wayne and Oakland may be somewhere around $1,500. In Kalkaska County, it may be $200. What we know is it's not $20 or $30. And what this law essentially does is puts a rate on what it's going to be statewide in all areas.
Representative LaFave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Oakland County. This contract you have with Neo Network, it's essentially they're a middleman between you and the providers?
Yeah, so they're a third-party administrator, that's correct.
And I guess I'm trying to understand here, if all you're doing is recovering your costs, what's in it for them? And more importantly, what's in it for you guys? I mean, if all you're doing is recovering the costs associated with this technology, how is there room for a third party to come in? And if they weren't making money, they wouldn't be there, would they?
Well, what I will say, and in the essence of time for the chairman, our agreement with the leases with Sprint's going to realize about $250,000 a year for the Road Commission for Oakland County, which we're going to reinvest in our road network. So there is a little bit there. What Neo does, they bring the experience. They're familiar with small cells. They know when they have inventoried our vertical infrastructure. They know what the Sprints, the Verizons, the AT&Ts, the locations that they're looking for. That's not our expertise at the Road Commission. We need an expert to help us with that.
Well, I appreciate you telling me that you guys are going to help use some of this funding for roads, but I have an article here from July 9th where a road commissioner of Oakland County was quoted as saying the revenue generated would be used to, quote, improve the organization's buildings. Is that what the plan is for this extra revenue if this bill doesn't pass?
Well, some of that may go for our own infrastructure. What does that mean? That means if revenue from this is going into our building infrastructure, then we're not using road dollars to do that. So that means all the road dollars we get will be going to the street.
So I guess, is the real intent of the opposition of Oakland County today because you're afraid of, are you really just trying to recover costs, or are you trying to get money to invest in the buildings and the infrastructure, the buildings of Oakland County Road Commission?
We want to be, the number one priority here is to be reimbursed for our costs. We do not believe that the public should subsidize billion-dollar companies. Now, at the end of the day, if we are able to have this public-private partnership, and I've heard that all the time from members up here, we need to be more innovative, creative with how we're funding our roads. Here's a solution that is truly a public-private partnership that does the public some good and the cell providers get what they want. This is a win-win situation.
And I think we both can agree that we should not be subsidizing particular businesses. I just think that I have a disagreement. I don't think that we are subsidizing anybody. I've read through the bill. You are going to be able to recoup necessary costs on this. And at least from my perspective, I have 3 counties in the Upper Peninsula that charge absolutely nothing to put these in. And they do it as a service to the residents of Dickinson, Delta, and Menominee counties. My folks are calling and begging to get this stuff. The residents are demanding it. I don't see why a fee schedule, if you will, that was agreed upon by basically everybody, Michigan, MML, tons of other organizations have come in and said that this is a strike in the middle balance. I think that might be the case. I wish that this was something that was acceptable to you guys, but we really need this technology across the state of Michigan, and it's going to be very difficult for companies to invest in the future if every different township and every different area has got wildly different fee schedules and things of that nature. So I yield my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative LaFave. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. The next witness we're going to hear from is Haran Rashish. I hope I pronounced that correctly, with Extenet Systems. And by the way, because of the unusual timing of this committee, there are other committees meeting. If you have members getting up and leaving, they are not being disrespectful to your concerns. But Education Committee is meeting and holding votes, et cetera, et cetera. So don't interpret it otherwise, please. We expect them all to be here toward the end when there's discussion by the committee.
Mr. Chair, I've submitted written testimony. In the interest of time, I'll pass.
Okay. Next person we're going to hear from, so that was a supporter. An opponent is Vince Argonne, Neo Networks. Is it Mr. Argonne?
Aragona.
Aragona.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak. Interesting times, for sure. So again, my name is Vince Aragona. I'm the founder, CEO of Neo Network Development, Inc. We're headquartered out of Naperville, Illinois, and as you've just heard from both Oakland County and Wayne County, we're the face behind the name of the program that we developed for Oakland County. And I think it's interesting. We saw the same problem. I mean, we saw the same exact problem 5 years ago. I've been immersed in it now for 20 years. I've actually been designing, deploying, and responsible for the operation of outdoor DAS networks for the past 20 years, one of the first folks to commercialize outdoor small cell networks. So we understand very clearly the challenges that are out there as far as deploying these networks. But when we took a look at the problem that we saw wasn't really necessarily entirely rooted with the local jurisdiction. The problem was really that local jurisdictions really just lacked headcount, subject matter expertise. They lacked resources, software, tools to effectively manage and administer access to the rights-of-way. So when we developed the program, it was no accident that we ended up working with Oakland County first. Oakland County is renowned nationally as innovators and very proactive in developing and attracting technologies. Everything from connected car, autonomous vehicles, every piece of my experience that I've had with them so far has been they're very actively looking for technology to come into Oakland County because of all the economic development benefits and the social good that these networks do. But they didn't have the expertise. They didn't have the subject matter expertise to really develop and catalog and inventory and market those assets to the wireless carriers. And that's the difference. There's a passive program where people come in and wait to file a permit, and the permit has to be processed. It's very different when we go out and attract these technology providers and bring them into the county. The thing that I think has got the most problems with the bill is, and we're not on record, we're actually on record as being proponents of the bill with changes. But what we see happening across the country is that similar bills are ending up in litigation that could protract out for 4 or 5 years, in which case nothing gets done. Networks simply do not get built with this type of litigation revolving around this type of legislation. So ultimately, again, nothing we're going to be able to do to change anyone's mind as to whether it goes through or not. We're just trying to point out that litigation in and of itself can be very costly. But the actual activity that revolves around administering access and getting carriers access to poles and getting them permits to install poles, it's a skill set. You know, whenever you build a network in the right of way, it's hard. It's always going to be hard, whether you're putting in small cells or fiber. You know, you've got issues where you've got to deal with your engineering companies and the jurisdiction and pole owners, the utilities themselves. The problems that I've experienced with the jurisdictions themselves, the problems that they have is this is preemption. This is absolutely preemption of all local discretionary decision making as it relates to access to the rights of way. The other big issue is by extinguishing any form of revenue that goes along with these types of networks, literally extinguishing those revenues. Not only do they not have the headcount to support those activities today, they have no mechanism to hire folks that actually can help to affect that access. And that's been problematic for the past 20 years. So, you know, ultimately that's part of the issue that we bring to bear. Oakland County, Wayne County asked me to come in and speak and just basically provide a very quick overview of how the program is different than the legislative version of the bill. And it really revolves around how we treat revenue and revenue eligibility. Essentially, the rate structure that we've developed and that's been published by Oakland County in accordance to federal law is really based on who owns the pole. Oakland County doesn't charge a carrier for an attachment to a utility pole. They don't own it. So they can't charge rent for a pole that they don't own. But there's nothing in the Federal Register at all that requires streetlights and traffic signal poles to be characterized as utility poles and relegated to a cost recovery based rate structure. They're actually entitled by federal law to fair and just compensation for those structures. So the way that our program works is we make all the inventory available, utility poles, streetlight poles, expedite the permit process across the board. but we only charge rent for traffic signal poles or street light poles that are owned by that local jurisdiction. And that's the secret sauce. That's the magic answer, is by allowing jurisdictions to recover revenues from infrastructure that they own in order to be able to process applications quickly for utility poles. That's what ultimately gets networks built. And that's how our program essentially works. And to answer the question that came up earlier, how do we get paid? We're a revenue sharing arrangement company. We come in and we help. We've attracted carriers, attracted carrier interest. We're bringing technology partners and technology investment into Oakland County and soon to be Wayne County. But we're not going to be able to do that if every form of revenue gets extinguished with a stroke of a pen. This bill not only extinguishes any...
Mr. Aragona, we appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, the next person we will have up in favor of the legislation is Jeff Bohm, St. Clair County Commissioner. Commissioner, welcome. Push the red button if it's not already pushed, and we look forward to your testimony.
Yeah, my comments will be brief, but I echo the representative from the Upper Peninsula, because in St. Clair County, where we're at, we still have some very rural areas, which we don't have cell phone technology, we don't have internet, and we are just kind of behind the times. And when I first came and spoke 6 months ago or so on behalf of this, I got a call from one of my township supervisors, not very happy, and I said, you don't have cell phones, you don't have internet, how do you expect us as a county to move forward? It just, to me, that's unacceptable. So I have a quick prepared statement.
Commissioner, did you say you've testified on this before the committee?
In the Senate.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, sir.
Just a quick prepared statement.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Bohm, and I am the chairperson of the St. Clair County Board of Commissioners. I'm here today to ask you that you support Senate Bill 637, which has the potential to profoundly impact the economy of St. Clair County. Senate Bill 637 simplifies the permitting process for wireless providers looking to deploy small cell technology in our communities, which will spur much needed infrastructure investment in our region. In today's age, a strong communications infrastructure is a critical selling point for any municipality working to attract new talent and investment to a region. With that being said, we should work to create a regulatory environment that encourages wireless providers to invest in the kind of enhancements that will keep our wireless networks on the cutting edge. Senate Bill 637 accomplishes that. Senate Bill 637 is a result of many hours of conversation and compromise between industry, local government, and other interested parties, and Chairman Knopf should be commended for the process that led to this legislation. If Senate Bill 637 will spark meaningful investment in my county and the communities just like it throughout the state, I hope that you will make the responsible choice for Michigan's economic prospects by supporting Senate Bill 637. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Lisinski has a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I also echo where I represent rural areas that they have a distinct and direct and immediate need for increased broadband and cellular access. However, in all of my conversations with providers, I have been told explicitly that this technology will not extend networks. It will enhance networks where a service is existing because these small cell technologies reach very short distance, 100 yards. And it will not extend service into unserved areas. Could you tell me why or where you have the information that you believe this will enhance service in rural areas?
Well, I'll even step forward. We're a border community with Canada. Okay, as you just drive from our coastline, which is our most populated areas, we constantly drop calls. And we had an issue, and I know they had to turn some of the signal strength down probably a year and a half ago because calls used to bleed into Canada, so on and so forth. So as you drive our coastline, those particular areas would help. There's half a dozen spots as I drive, and I say, oh, I'll have to call you back because I'm going to be losing the phone call here. I drive throughout our county all day long. And like anything, yeah, we've got some more of the rural, western parts. There needs to be probably some additional cell phone towers, some additional build out. But to me, this is one piece of the puzzle of many infrastructure needs that we need to continue to move our county forward. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you for your testimony. In opposition, I've been asked by folks who've organized those who are imposed this legislation to give some deference to folks who have come in from out of town, some even from out of state. So if I understand correctly, and because of their expertise, Dr. Sharon Goldberg, are you in the audience, Dr. Goldberg? Please come forward. We look forward to your testimony in opposition to the legislation. You have 5 minutes, ma'am. Please proceed.
Chairman Hume, just a request. 2 of my colleagues were not able to attend. Would it be possible to give me some of the time that would have been allocated to Dr. Ghulam? No, so it's only 5 minutes. Okay. So, Chairman Hume and committee members, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm Sharon Goldberg. I'm an internal medicine physician. I've practiced medicine for 21 years, and my background is mostly academic, internal medicine, hospital-based, clinical research, and medical education. I am going to skip many of the things I wanted to say because I didn't realize it was only 5 minutes. Wireless radiation has biological effects, period. This is no longer a subject for debate when you look at PubMed and the peer-reviewed literature. These effects are seen in all life forms: plants, animals, insects, microbes. In humans, we have clear evidence of cancer now. There is no question. We have evidence of DNA damage, cardiomyopathy, which is the precursor of congestive heart failure, neuropsychiatric effects. So 5G is not a conversation about whether or not these biological effects exist. They clearly do. 5G is a conversation about unsustainable healthcare expenditures. Why do I say this? We've been sitting on the evidence for EMR and chronic disease for decades. And now we are seeing all these epidemics appearing. So diabetes is the first epidemic. I think most of you know the statistics. They're very scary. 1 in 3 American children will become diabetic in their lifetime, and if they're Hispanic females, the number is 1 in 2. Okay. So what does this have to do with wireless radiation? Wireless radiation and other electromagnetic fields, such as magnetic fields and dirty electricity, have been clearly associated with elevated blood sugar and diabetes. That is what the peer-reviewed literature says. It is not opinion. The closer you live to a cell tower, the higher your blood glucose. That is based on hemoglobin A1C measurements. So the idea with small cells of putting the cells closer to people's homes and bedrooms scientifically is very dangerous. And from an economic perspective, it's dangerous. And you may not know this. I was shocked to find this out. But the way you create a model of diabetes in rats in the lab is by exposing them to 2.4 gigahertz. And this is not for long-term exposure. So I don't have time to talk about the costs, but the huge problem with diabetes really is chronic kidney disease. End-stage renal disease, the worst complication of diabetes, leads to hemodialysis. Hemodialysis is an automatic qualification for Medicare. And if you don't qualify for Medicare, we still have to dialyze the patient. And the state ends up paying in many different instances. So renal failure is 1% of Medicare, but it takes up 7% of all Medicare expenditures. I don't have time to talk about this anymore, but once again, so the other epidemics that clearly link from the science with electromagnetic radiation are related to mental health. And this is straight from PubMed. This isn't my opinion, this is science.
Dr.
Okay?
Goldberg, for those of us who aren't physicians, what is PubMed?
I'm sorry. It's just it's our National Library of Medicine. This is where you would go. This is just the peer-reviewed literature. So we have 3 epidemics that clearly, they're essentially one epidemic. We have deterioration of mental health in the United States. And if you look really at the science, what does it show? And these epidemics are our suicide epidemic, epidemics in violent, shootings, and the opioid epidemic. And I don't have 5 minutes is not the time to talk about this. This is in the peer-reviewed literature. I have a file to submit for the record, but these are facts. These aren't, and these are things that have just been glossed over by the wireless industry, and I really don't have time to talk about them in 5 minutes. I wish I did. But we need to examine our epidemics in the context of our EMF exposures. What does that mean? that means that the CDC, tracking these epidemics, we need to start measuring how much radiation are people being exposed to. And before we roll out 5G, and this means there are 4 kinds of electromagnetic fields that we know are harmful to human health. So radio frequency radiation, magnetic fields, dirty electricity, and electric fields, okay? Our exposure, any given person, and all humans are affected by EMFs. Our given exposure has nothing to do with the research that my colleagues are going to cite, with the National Toxicology Program. That is an assessment of the risk of 1 cell phone in the near field, okay? What is our exposure in a day? It's not 1 cell phone. It's cell phones, it's multiple wireless networks, it's smart meters, it's cell towers. It's this sandwich, and it all adds up. And this is a serious problem for occupational health, public safety, and personal safety. And I feel that it's irresponsible to be even talking about the Internet of Things and rolling out a new untested technology when we're not even measuring what are our current exposures from the current networks.
Doctor, appreciate your testimony. Would you again provide us with your credentials? You said at the beginning.
Yes, I'm an MD. I'm board certified in internal medicine. I've been assistant professor at different medical schools, mostly in New York, most recently the University of Miami. And I got interested in electromagnetic fields after my administrator at the University of Miami gave me a new iPhone. I used it for 20 minutes on speaker, and my finger was burning at the end of the call. So that was years ago. I started reading about the science and connecting with other scientists. And really my expertise, I've taken care of a lot of patients with chronic disease. So when I talk about diabetes and, for instance, heart failure, that, the National Toxicology Program shows clear evidence of cardiomyopathy in that study. In other words, that's a precursor to congestive heart failure. And I want to just read one thing, if you'll allow me. This is from the United States Renal Data System, Healthcare Expenditures for Persons with Chronic Kidney Disease. So over half of the 2015 Medicare spending for beneficiaries aged 65 and older was for those who had diagnoses of CKD, diabetes mellitus, or heart failure. All 3 of these conditions, when you look as an independent scientist, not someone who's funded by wireless, all of those 3 conditions are linked. So diabetes and heart failure are linked with EMF exposures. It's very clear.
Doctor, what are your trained medical professional?
Yes.
We don't have one on the panel. What are we to make of the American Cancer Society, for example, telling us there's no evidence of harmful product?
Well, at this point, there's a national and international 5G appeal. I don't know how many thousands of people have signed. But the point is that many of these organizations have conflicts of interest. And I can't speak to, I don't know who's on their board, who made these decisions. My testimony comes from, I've been reading this literature for years. And really, I got interested in it because I've spent my career taking care of so many patients who were sick in the hospital that when I found out about the links, I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. So I've read these articles myself, and the experts who don't work for telecom and who are in their independent research, everyone comes to the same conclusion. This isn't, we're not in a place where we should be debating this anymore. This is exactly what happened with tobacco. It's the exact same thing. And really, right now, the only people protecting, the only people who are able to protect Americans are our legislators, because we don't have any relevant regulatory guidelines to protect human health. The FCC guidelines were developed for short-term exposures, 6 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on it's a phone or an outdoor exposure. And they have absolutely no connection to the biological effects that have been very clearly summarized in the Bio Initiative. That's a huge document generated. All of the summaries are there. And I've got it here for you if anyone wants to read it. I have very concise summaries and abstracts documenting everything that I'm saying. So I know there are plenty of people here that are probably rolling their eyes, but you know, in academic medicine, we have a name for what's happening now with 5G. This is called, and what has happened with wireless communication, this is called, you know, 5G is an untested application of a technology that we know is harmful. We know it from the science. This is, in academics, this is called human subjects research. Human subjects research is very tightly regulated. You can't just roll out some type of a research project on human beings unless, A, you have their informed consent, so they understand the risks and benefits, and B, you have the approval. Like someone has actually, you know, examined the literature and said, okay, this research project, we believe that it's safe. There's no evidence in the science to indicate that it would not be safe. We have decades of evidence to show that it is not safe.
Thank you, Dr. Goldberg.
Thank you.
And very briefly, if you can, what do you mean by conflict of interest?
I mean that, so I've taught, one of the things that I taught in medical school is evidence-based medicine, so teaching medical students and residents how to critically evaluate the literature, the science. And one of the first things that you teach residents is that you always have to look at the funding. So, and you can read about it. Marcia Engel, the editor of New England Journal, just wrote a great op-ed in the New York Times about researchers who are funded by private industry. The results of their research are much more likely to support whatever it is that is being funded. That's clear.
Representative Garrett has a question.
Yes.
Good morning, doctor. Just
Good
a
morning.
really quick question. What is the normal RMF that individual could be exposed to? And if these small cells are installed, what is the prediction of how much RMF the human body would experience? And then the second question would be, if we know that RMF is a issue, do we limit the amount of exposure that somebody with cardio issues in the hospitals, whether they're going through a CAT scan or, so are we limiting that because we know that just small cells alone is not the issue? It's, as you talked about earlier, it's the sandwich. So give me the normal levels, what the prediction is that the human body would experience moving forward.
Well, I'm so glad that you're asking that question. And the answer is that, well, no one's measuring. And that is the problem. That's the problem. Because we have, and the way I think about this is in an occupational health perspective. I think about, because people go to work, and so for instance, your exposure will depend on what you do in a given day. So if one cell phone causes cancer, clear evidence of cancer, DNA damage, heart damage, well, what happens if you work at an airport? What happens if you work in a stadium where there are 100,000 people coming to watch a football game and everyone's using their phone at the same time? And so the problem is that we have a very, very systematic, clear, empiric way to measure these exposures, and it's a discipline called building biology, and we actually have someone here trained in building biology, and I asked him to bring the meters. If anyone after this meeting is interested, I can show anyone exactly how we measure, okay? But that is the problem, that we don't measure, and there are certain situations relevant to public safety where we really do need to be measuring, with firefighters, with airline pilots. Because when you activate microwave radiation inside an enclosed metal space, you get amplification, you have increased power density. So think about it, an airplane, everyone's with their devices, every device is emitting radiation, and the access point is right next to the cockpit usually. So what does this do to pilots? What does this do to firefighters? We already have a submission to the FCC from Susan Foster about firefighters that were unable to function in the line of duty. This is from 2013, after exposure to a cell tower that was put up near their station, and they They also have two-way communication devices that they wear. So we have to measure these exposures. That is the start, and not go ahead and roll out a whole bunch of Internet of Things with more devices that we're not even measuring what we're exposed to now.
Doctor, thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
We have far fewer people who are supportive of the bill who signed up to testify. The next one that I have an opportunity for is Dio O'Rourke of Verizon, who has I'm pretty sure not testified before. Mr. O'Rourke, do you want to testify?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. No,
They weren't applauding that you're not testifying, I'm sure.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any testimony. I'm available later if anyone has questions.
Okay. Is there anybody else who has submitted a card that we may have misplaced, who's in favor of the legislation, that wishes to testify in support of the legislation? If not, the next person in opposition. Mr. O'Rourke, if you would please take the stand. Representative Lefebvre has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke, for coming and testifying today. I just wanted to see if you had any response to the last person that testified. She mentioned on the record that 2.4 gigahertz has been proven to cause cancer. Is my understanding that every Wi-Fi network in the entire country uses 2.4 gigahertz technology? Am I wrong?
Representative Lefebvre, thanks for the question. I don't know the response to your question. Andy Emerson is here, who has a lot more detail on this issue. What I can say is that this is an issue that has been studied extensively by the FCC, that all small cell equipment must comply with FCC regulations and standards, and those standards are determined so that the equipment and the radio frequency emissions are far less than deemed to be at all dangerous to human health.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
What are we to make of testimony that the FCC standards address only the thermal effects, heat effects on the human body, as opposed to different effects? That's what we're told. So how do you address that?
Mr. Chairman, that's not an issue that I'm familiar with. I can just say that the FCC receives information from a number of expert agencies to study the health effects of RF emissions, and has determined that the small cell equipment that we'll be using is safe for human health.
Okay, thank you. The next, thank you for your answer to those questions. Excuse me, Vice Chair Lisinski has a question.
Thank you. Thank you. My understanding is you also have expertise in the Federal Communications Declaratory Ruling that was just issued last Wednesday?
Yes.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions around that. One, given that ruling that was issued last Wednesday by the FCC, stating that it was rolling out across the nation a set of rules that would, from the Federal Communications Commission's standpoint, accelerate the deployment of 5G. Would a yes vote by this committee or a no vote by this committee have any material impact on the rollout of 5G? Is there a way that this committee, by voting no on this bill, would halt the deployment of 5G in this state, given the declaratory ruling by the federal government?
Before you answer that, please answer in such a way as you don't assume that everybody on the committee has read the FCC declaratory statement. So tell us about that first, and then, of course, answer Vice Chair Lisinski's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So, quick background on the FCC order, which, as Vice Chair Lisinski just mentioned, was issued last week. The order and the Michigan bill fit together well. The FCC order provides broad parameters that deal with the deployment of small cell equipment in the right-of-way. But the FCC order leaves a great deal of leeway for states to operate within those parameters. For example, As you know, there are 20 states now that have passed small cell bills. The FCC looked at all of those statutes and determined that virtually all of the requirements in those state statutes are within the FCC's parameters. The Michigan bill is in the mainstream of bills that have already been passed, and so the Michigan bill is within the parameters that the FCC has created. But to Vice Chair Lozinski's question, a yes vote here is critical, because what the Michigan bill does that the FCC order does not do is it deals with a full range of issues that are not addressed by the FCC. I mean, just for example, the Michigan bill describes in detail what the administrative process will be for reviewing applications for small cells, and what information can be required, what criteria can cities look to. Once you get the permit, what can you do with it? That, and there's a whole bunch of other issues that this bill addresses. The stakeholders negotiated for almost 6 months working through all those details. And what that does by resolving those issues is it means, somebody spoke about litigation before, we have on the front end dealt with those issues so that the rollout of 5G and small cells can proceed smoothly in Michigan on terms that are specific to Michigan and that Michigan stakeholders have raised and dealt with in detail.
So but to the heart of my question, recognizing the number of people in this room who have concerns about health, who have concerns about other issues around 5G technology, the FCC essentially preempted every state and locality in the nation by putting in place this declaratory ruling. So 5G, based on the FCC ruling, will roll out across the nation. What we have the opportunity for in Michigan is to try and customize within what the FCC has now made the law of the land what will happen in Michigan. Is that a correct characterization? That we do not have the ability in the state of Michigan with the Federal Communications Declaratory Ruling to halt the rollout of 5G?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
If I could just ask one more around the parameters and guidelines. So when we are looking at then what we are doing in the state of Michigan to try and recognize the input of our townships, our local governments, and other places, similarly to how we just did with House Bill 5097 around installing broadband networks, similar to the Metro Act, a core tenet of those was that basic costs would be recovered and safety would be recognized. When you're looking at how then we have built that into this bill, do you see any place where communities would not be able to recover their true costs for inspection and safety? I believe it is recognized in parts, but I'd like to know your specific feelings on that, or specific interpretation of the current bill.
So, Vice Chair Lozinski, just to give you the mechanics of the bill, and I think this goes to your question, I'm looking at Section 11. It says, except as provided in this act, an authority shall not prohibit, regulate, or charge for the co-location of small cell wireless facilities. And so the idea was, let's put it all on the table. This bill lays out what you can charge, how you can regulate, and so forth. So there are one-time application fees that can be charged under this bill, but those are going to cover the one-time fees that can be charged.
So when I look at page 27, I'm sorry, let me get the page number, I think it was page 30. It's a big bill. And I am looking at that, it says, my apologies. If you'll give me just a moment here. That the authority, when they're putting in a new poll, that they will be able to recover the cost of the make-ready work. Shall not require more make-ready work. Fees for make-ready work shall not do any of the following, and that is exceed actual costs imposed on a non-discriminatory basis. Does that to you say that if a new pole needs to be installed and an inspection has to be done, an understanding that if the new pole is going to be installed there, you have to make sure there's not a sewer line underneath it, that a plan has to be reviewed. Does your interpretation of that make-ready work that shall be completed in 60 days shall include and any costs associated that shall not exceed any non-discriminatory basis, that the local township or local government can recover the costs to ensure that there's not an electric line underground, there's not a sewer line underground, there's not other infrastructure underground, that those inspections and safety and points of work that have to be done to ensure that those reasonable costs, again, on a non-discriminatory basis, no different for one company to the next, can be recovered by the local unit of government.
And just for the committee's benefit, the section that Vice Chair Lozinski is raising has to do with make-ready work. Mm-hmm. That's a specific scenario where if there is a city pole or local government pole that a wireless provider would like to co-locate that has put a small cell facility on, but that pole won't support the small cell, then it may be necessary for the wireless provider to come in and replace the pole. Mm-hmm. And Vice Chair Lozinski is exactly right. In that circumstance, city gets to recover its reasonable cost. In this case, the bill does not specify what those costs might be. So the city is going to be able to recover its reasonable cost involved in doing that make-ready work.
Representative Lefebvre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure exactly what states have signed legislation similar to this, but my understanding is that legislation has been introduced in nearly every legislature in the United States, and that I think we would be around the 25th if it were enacted today.
That's about right.
So I don't know if Ohio has it, or Illinois, or Indiana, or Wisconsin, but absent this legislation, and if all of our bordering states had legislation that essentially said, regardless of what community you're going to go into, that this is the set amounts that it's going to cost roughly. So a company such as the one that you work with, as Verizon, would be able to say, well, we know how much it's going to be to do 5,000 smart meters in Wisconsin and Indiana, but we don't know how much it's going to be in Michigan. We've got to deal with particular counties and particular townships and things of that nature. And there's just a question as to how the bigger range than there would be in other states. If this legislation is enacted, would that put us on a better footing to compete for those dollars and those jobs here in Michigan?
Oh, absolutely, Representative Lefebvre. And just to, and by the way, you mentioned Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. All three of those states do have small cell legislation, and so they are competitor states, if you will. But to highlight your point, just this week, Verizon began rolling out 5G service in 4 cities, including Indianapolis, just 250 miles south of here. What we are waiting for before we expand is for the industry standard 5G equipment to start being manufactured. We expect that next year, early next year. And when that happens, you're going to see a rapid expansion of 5G technology around the country. And certainly the states that have done sort of the political infrastructure, the political work to ready the playing field are going to be at a marked advantage.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Our next witness is going to be Paul Heroux from McGill University. And again, you have 5 minutes, sir.
I want to tackle the subject of insurance. You know that neither Lloyd's of London nor Swiss Re will underwrite liability policies for electromagnetic radiation because they think the health risk is too great. In other words, they believe that when the lawyers get involved, and I know many of them, the companies who deliver this radiation to the public could be wiped out. By combining 5G and self-driving cars equipped with radar, you would create an exceptional opportunity for a class action lawsuit against both telcos and the car industry. I don't know how you can support the deployment of 5G, a new cellular system that will seriously enhance human exposure to electromagnetic radiation, when you know what Dr. Goldberg just told you. And you know that the modulation that is introduced by 5G is a new threat on biological systems. We used to have frequency domain multiple access, time domain multiple access, code domain multiple access, and now we have 5G beamforming, all data compaction strategies that maximize the biological impact of this radiation. In other words, it's going to get a lot worse with this deployment. You know that all human cancers, and I use cancer as the, so to speak, the example here, although there's many other health effects of this radiation, because it's the most closely documented, because we have a long history, bad history with cancer. All human cancer, leukemia, colon, breast cancer, lung cancer, respond to electromagnetic radiation at levels hundreds of times below the FCC recommendations. By the way, the FCC have zero medical and biological expertise. They take their marching orders from the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. And while this institution was setting the standards, I was present. And I know how lightheartedly they suppressed any information that would impair the development of their applications. They just didn't want to hear about it. So it was never considered. How can you allow this when the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the foremost authority on human cancers, warned you twice in 2002 and in 2012 about the link between electromagnetic radiation and cancer in humans? The environment has to be cleaned up of electromagnetic radiation progressively, not augmented in radiation. Electromagnetic radiation has repeatedly been linked with cancer in animals. Chu, in 1992, reported with 200 rats a multiplication by 4 of primary malignancies in animals exposed. Ripaccioli, in 1997, reported with 200 rats enhancements of lymphomas by a factor of 2.4 in mice exposed to EMR. This year, the National Toxicology Program is reporting strong evidence of similar results with 1,440 rats and 1,680 mice. Finally, also this year, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy is confirming the NTP results using 2,448 male and female rats. So I urge you, don't listen to me. Listen to the advice of 4,288 rats and 1,680 mice that were put in a carefully controlled situation and are telling you that cancer for only one disease is enhanced by this radiation. Diabetes is 25% of your health budget. If electromagnetic radiation enhances this even a little bit, look at the cost that it entails. These rats were not biased. They couldn't be. They developed tumors as a result of the radiation to the best that science can determine. And there is a group of people that are hypersensitive to these fields confirming that the effect is real, and these people have genetic variations that we understand are linked to the electromagnetic radiation. What America needed a long time ago was a chicken in every pot. Now what America needs is a fiber, an optical fiber in every home. The data has to come true, but wireless radiation is unfortunately a bad idea.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. And if you would briefly, what are your credentials with McGill University?
I am at the Faculty of Medicine. I am the director of the Occupational Health Program at, within the Department of Epidemiology, Biostatistics, and Occupational Health.
Okay, thank you. Representative Deanne, did you have a question of this testifier? Okay. Representative Elder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and thank you for your testimony today. Just to let you know, some of us are Truman Democrats. We still think there should be a chicken in every pot. At the beginning of your testimony, you indicated concern that implementation of this technology will cause liability to the auto industry.
Yes.
Are you aware that both the General Motors Corporation and the Ford Motor Company are in support of this bill because they feel it's necessary for their autonomous vehicle future?
Look, historically, industry does not have a good record of making good choices. GM's original view on car crash safety was that cars don't cause accidents, drivers do. American industry had to follow the lead of Volvo in Sweden before it included collapsible steering columns that reduced the death rate by 12%, airbags that reduced the death rate by 25%, and safety bags that reduced the death rate by 42%, crumple zones and other devices in cars. Remember these heavy cars with big bumpers that were full of chrome everywhere, you know, that were killing machines rather than meant to be used by humans. And another example is that as a result of GM's policy of supporting the inclusion of tetraethyl lead in gasoline instead of ethanol, many decades ago, 15 million US children lost 10 IQ points and had permanent problems with hyperactivity, behavior, and learning. So don't tell me that we have to follow the recommendations of the captains of industry, because I worked in industry for more than a decade. And I love these people, but their focus is so great on what they're doing. They want to serve, but their focus is incredibly directed to their task. They have no knowledge of health effects of their works, and this creates a schism within society that we have to bridge. And unfortunately, this may fall upon you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Representative DeAnda, do you know?
I'll wait till the next one, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, do you want Mr. O'Rourke to come back?
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
Representative DeAnda, have a question of Mr. O'Rourke. Representative DeAnda's questions are always popular.
Thank you for that applause. Mr. O'Rourke, my question is this: with the small cell technology and how that's going to change for our technology across the state of Michigan, would you say there's going to be abundancy of copper that's going to be needed for these small cells?
Representative DeAnda, I would say that there's going to be an abundance of fiber that's going to be needed to support the small cells. To be clear, this bill only deals with the small cells and the facilities right in the vicinity of the pole, doesn't address the fiber, but you are correct. Fiber is needed to support small cells.
I appreciate that, because we're from the copper area, and we're trying to develop the copper back to the heydays of where I came from. So, thank you.
Okay, next, now, is there someone in opposition to the bill who can address the FCC declaratory ruling that has turned in a card? If not, okay, and have you signed up to testify? Okay. And what is your name, ma'am? Okay, former commissioner.
Yes,
Right.
Ingham and Eaton counties.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Regarding the FCC, 3 cities are in the process or have actually filed lawsuits, Boston, Seattle, New York City, as well as dozens of other cities. And my knowledge beyond that is not extensive, but however, since I am at the table, I'd like to speak anecdotally, personally, about the electromagnetic waves. Last Thursday night, I could not fall asleep that evening till, well, it wasn't the evening, it was the next day at 6:45 in the morning. I live in South Lansing near a cluster of cell towers. In the spring, there were 2 occasions when I went to bed at 9 p.m. and I woke up at around 4 a.m. on both occasions to this pulsing sound. It would be inaudible to someone else, but it was a pulsing sound, and I started doing some research. And that's what led me to come to this meeting today. And I suffer from tinnitus, doctors call it tinnitus, and it has gotten worse over the summer. And it's hard to explain to you what it is, but it happens every about half second. For instance, I guess I can't pick it up on the mic, but it would be, because I can hear it right now. So well, I'm being distracted because I'm in the meeting, but it's less than a second, and this is constant. And it's very disturbing at night when I'm trying to fall asleep. I feel that I am hypersensitive to these electromagnetic waves. So anymore, I cannot fall asleep unless, I'm in front of the TV and I'm, I can't keep my eyes open. Otherwise, just because it's 10 o'clock and I have to get up the next morning at 6 a.m., I can't just go to bed. If it's 11 o'clock, I can't just go to bed. I have to be literally exhausted now before I can fall asleep. And after, I'm not boring you, am I? I saw your head nodding a little bit.
I am sympathizing.
Okay, and I see this baby here, and I'm glad there is a child here today, but we know that the effects are even more detrimental on children, young, growing bodies and minds. And the bottom line here really is that we have to do the studies. FDA, before a medicine is released, studies have to be done. And now these electromagnetic waves affect everyone. Everyone in this room is affected. Everyone on the planet is affected by this.
Commissioner, you said you were in a position to comment on the FCC statement.
I wanted it to be known that there are several dozen cities in this country that have filed lawsuits, including those major cities, Seattle,
just in the last week,
New York. Well, I think there's a certain amount of time they have, so they either are filing or have filed lawsuits against the FCC on that declaratory ruling. Okay, thank you.
Questions of the committee? And you're prepared to talk about the FCC document in particular? I am. And your name is?
Mike Watson.
Mike.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Please keep it brief as you can, Mike.
I will be very brief. I am actually co-counsel on at least one of the briefs that has been filed at the FCC already in response to its August 3rd order. I have just a few points. First, the FCC has broadly preempted this field. Those are the orders that have been in place. The first in 2014 on small cells, which aren't small, and then an order on August 3rd of this year, and then an order of last week, Representative Lisinski was talking about. I can't imagine a more thorough occupation of a field than the hundreds of pages, fine print, more than 1,000 footnotes that have been issued by the FCC on this subject. The FCC already controls all aspects of wireless, and now they've deemed to take charge of our right-of-way, and yes, there is going to be litigation about that. But the point is for this body that for you to act now You would do it potentially without authority and without need, since the FCC has already acted. And they've acted very specifically, notwithstanding some of the comments that have been made, and even the FCC comment saying that, well, we're making room for all those state laws that AT&T ran around and got passed. We don't want to preempt those, but that was the first use of the word preemption in their 110-page order. They then used it 109 more times to talk about that they're preempting. And they're preempting local government primarily, but they would also be preempting various aspects of this bill. So you don't need to act. All you would be doing is adding another layer of rules that are, I suppose, similar, but different enough that local government, my clients, are going to have to weed through now 2 layers of rules. And it wasn't easy to begin with, and it isn't going to be any easier. So you don't need to act. There's 25 states that haven't adopted these rules. I just want to comment very briefly, if I may. Size. We keep hearing about pizza boxes. We also hear about make ready. Why would we have to make a pole ready for a pizza box? Well, that's because the statute actually will, this bill allows a 31 cubic feet of equipment plus a half dozen accepted pieces of equipment, so 31 cubic feet plus. That is an industrial refrigerator size, times 4, because there's 4 providers, and the FCC says you can't discriminate, you let one on, you got to let the rest on. And 40 feet, we hear about that in the statute. Well, the FCC already says if you approve one of these, then you get to add 10 feet. So it's not 40, it's 50 feet with 4 refrigerators on it. And maybe the biggest issue, I think, for this group, and partisan, both sides, we hear about 5G coming. Well, it hasn't actually been defined yet, so it doesn't actually exist, but it's interesting to hear the discussion. But where in this bill, or any bill, or the FCC orders for that matter, is the industry obligated to do anything? Zero. Not a hint. There are promises, as we've seen in other bills like this, but there is no obligation, not on build-out, anywhere. Not in rural America, rural Michigan, not in poor urban centers. They don't have to do anything in exchange for this giveaway of public property that's otherwise supported by the taxpayer. I think those are really my major points.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Without reference to this bill in particular, as a member of the legislative branch, my only authority comes from the 90,000 people that elected me, not from the Federal Communications Commission. And the judiciary can do its job in its sphere of influence.
Well, I would agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I think the FCC has wildly overstepped its limitations.
Representative Lauer has a question.
Sir.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I think you pretty much said what I was going to say. We definitely have authority on this subject matter. The local governments are a subdivision of the state. There's absolutely no question that we have full authority on this bill, so it's disingenuous to suggest that we don't have authority, so I just wanted to point that out. Thank you very much.
Well, the FCC is federal government, and the federal government does preempt the state and the local government if they do so within their congressional authority. So that is how preemption works. I don't agree that they should do it, but they have done it.
Okay. We have all committee members, yes? Are you signed up to testify? Okay, come forward. And you're in opposition? We don't have anybody yet signed up to, or any further signed up to testify in support. And you've got, at this point, about 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Rachel Karabazik. I am the...
Push the red button, Rachel.
Yes, I am the Michigan Outreach Director of We Are the Evidence, an advocacy organization protecting the rights of those affected by wireless technology. I will just cover my points on regarding the FCC. Basically, the FCC has been doing all in its power against the 10th Amendment to take over the rightful power of the states and the people regarding public and private use of rights of way. In like manner, this bill strives to grant the state of Michigan the power to take away the rights of all people, as well as counties, townships, and municipalities. Is the Michigan legislature going to pass this bill and be on the side of industry, or will it be with the people of Michigan? Supporting the bill is essentially going against cities and municipalities fighting to maintain local control, as we all know. The public will remember those who voted against their rights and interests. And as was just mentioned, obviously this is at a federal level. This has already been decided. The state of Michigan, though, has the chance to show the people that they will protect our rights. And basically, in addition, there will be significant privacy and cybersecurity issues that will also rise up from this rush to implement the system that needs further scientific, medical, and engineering analysis. The biological health effects have been eloquently stated by Dr. Goldberg here, as well as others who have been affected. Basically, at this point, what we need, those of us who are affected, I can tell you myself, I 100% have loved technology my whole life. I was in a career where I traveled for work for years, was inundated with everything wireless. I reached a breaking point where I became affected. My life completely changed. I sought out a refuge, a more rural setting. I have been able to thrive there. My health has recovered immensely. At this point, myself and really thousands of others who are in my position just in Michigan who are fully aware of their health effects, with many more, as the woman who just spoke, are just discovering that they're affected. We need to have a safe haven established. We need an area that we will be able to live, even just a small rural setting, because at the rate things are going, it's sounding like this radiation, these microwave towers will be installed everywhere, covering, blanketing every square inch of our state. So all we are asking is to please consider us, consider the many who are affected and many more who will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. These committee members have asked for the opportunity to themselves comment on the legislation, perhaps offer amendments. We're at that portion of the committee meeting where we're going to address those. Are there, in fact, individuals who want to offer amendments to the legislation? Okay, Representative DeAnda? For an amendment? Okay, if there are no amendments, I'm going to continue for a few minutes to take testimony. Is Dr. Goldberg still here? Dr. Goldberg. Senator Goldberg, you're welcome to have you accompany your good wife, but you've already testified. So, Dr. Goldberg, no more than 5 minutes.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay.
Just scoot over so you're right in front of the microphone, one way or the other. Come on over here. Switch. You can change chairs if you need to. This one, hey, go the other way and it's even easier, but whatever.
Can you hear me? Is it better? Okay, yeah. Excellent. Okay, hello, good morning. My name is Dr. Angie Goldberg, and I'm here today to oppose SB 637 due to adverse health impacts from wireless radiation, including but not limited to cancer and DNA damage. My background is that I practiced as a board-certified pediatrician, and I also studied hospital and molecular epidemiology at U of M School of Public Health. I've been reviewing the studies showing the impacts of wireless radiation on our health, and there are now thousands of studies showing the following adverse health impacts to wireless radiation: cancer, oxidative damage, DNA failure, cardiac arrhythmias, and other effects on the heart muscle, as well as blood pressure and vascular effects. ADHD is skyrocketing, behavioral disorders, and learning difficulties, sleep disturbances and memory loss, changes involving the blood-brain barrier and effects on neuron firing rates in the EEGs, disrupted immune function and change in stress proteins, reproductive and fertility effects. I encourage you to look at the website bioinitiative.org. These these impacts are well documented in over 3,600 papers. In addition, a large $25 million study conducted by the FDA also reveals that wireless radiation causes cancer and DNA damage. With all of this in mind, we should not be pursuing policies that would expose our families, our friends, and our communities to an increase in wireless radiation. 5G technology greatly increases our exposure to wireless radiation. Some analyses of 5G networks have concluded that transmitters will be required every 2 to 10 houses. Ask yourself this: how many people out there would choose to move next to a cell tower emitting wireless radiation if you had a choice? Well, if SB637 goes through, they will put the transmitters wherever they want, approximately every 2 to 10 houses, and you will have no choice. And the amount of wireless radiation you will be exposed to will be greatly increased. From a medical perspective, this will be disastrous. You may be asking yourself, why isn't the federal government protecting us from this? Unfortunately, it's the FCC that sets what a safe level of radiation exposure is, not the FDA or the CDC. In many cases, the FCC chairman has no health background and has strong ties with the telecom industry, as is the case with this current FCC chair, who is a lawyer for Verizon. They either have jobs with the telecoms before or after they're done being FCC chair, they go ahead and they get their high-paying jobs with the telecoms after. This has led to looking out for the telecom industry, not the health care of our communities. In fact, the allowed level of wireless radiation exposure in the U.S. is substantially higher than is allowed in other countries. Having the FCC chair be in charge of what a safe wireless radiation level is very much like having a tobacco company decide how many packs of cigarettes it's safe to smoke each day. So now you have a choice before you. The data is solid, showing adverse health impacts from wireless radiation. Thousands upon thousands of studies, independent from telecom-funded studies, have been done showing the proof. We can still pursue high tech, but pursue it in a way that will not harm our families, our friends, and our communities. Please vote no on SB 637. Thank you.
Ms. Goldberg, again, your credentials are?
I'm a physician, and I also studied hospital and molecular epidemiology at University of Michigan School of Public Health.
Okay, Representative Riley has a question.
I just had a question about the FDA study. So is this a fairly recent study, and what are the findings from that, and are those findings refuted at all?
Yes. Well, actually, there's 3,600 studies showing the same thing. But in addition to that, they had a large 14-year study, $25 million study, and the NTP study. And within the paper we gave everybody, and as a matter of fact, every Michigan representative and senator has this paper. If you look towards the boxed section, you'll see the findings. It's on page, let's see here. It's on page 10, the findings of these studies. The boxed and directly underneath the box study.
Are those,
and this is just a recent, I mean, this is.
Are those results you can briefly summarize?
Sure. Okay. Well, it causes cancer and DNA damage. That's the final thing. The study confirmed that wireless radiation indeed causes cancer and DNA damage at non-thermal levels, below the FCC safety limits, which deny non-thermal effects. Dr. Ron Melnick, PhD, senior toxicologist and director of special programs in the NIEHS, who led the study until he retired, said, the NTP tested the hypothesis that cell phone radiation could not cause health effects, and that hypothesis has now been disproved. The experiment has been done, and after extensive reviews, the consensus is that there was a carcinogenic effect. In regards to DNA damage, he said that the results of the study should put to the rest the old argument that RF radiation cannot cause DNA damage. The scientist in the press conference in 2016 said that the public must be warned.
And that study is from whom?
This is from the NTP study. It's a large $25 million, 14-year study, extensive federal study.
NTP is what?
NTP, National Toxicology Program, right?
Okay.
But by the FDA, sponsored by and conducted by the FDA.
Okay, thank you.
And the FDA and the EPA and the CDC, those should be the people that are in charge of determining what safe levels we should be exposed to with radiation. It should not be a person that was a lawyer on Verizon's and has no health care, nothing. They know nothing.
Thank you for your testimony. Now, committee members have asked for the opportunity to comment themselves. I'm a former county commissioner. I'm a Roberts Rules guy, but we operate under Mason, so I would remind members of the committee that if you want to address the merits of legislation, you need to do so before any motions are made regarding amendments or final action, that kind of thing. So Representative Tedder has asked for an opportunity for commentary. If there's any other member who would like to speak on the merits of the legislation, that would be appropriate. Representative Tedder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I know those of us on this committee have been contemplating this legislation or some iteration of that for, I would say, the better part of 2 years. And in all fairness to the people in the audience, they might not have equally been affiliated with this process. But what I do know is that, you know, we've been, the House has been considering this legislation for the better part of 6 months, and I do know those in the room perhaps were participatory in the Senate hearings as well. So I'm just speaking specifically to the House. 6 months of consideration, inclusive of hearings, 50 plus hours of meetings, as I understand it, with many key stakeholders, and you know, well over 100 amendments. And you know, I'll state first and foremost, I have an amazing and incredible relationship with my locals. I hold my supervisors in very high esteem, as do I hold the organizations that represent local government all across this state, the townships, the counties, the Michigan Municipal League. They've been great partners in my nearly 4 years on the job. And it's really been my understanding up to this point that these organizations have been neutral and in large part, while not getting everything they want, that found a landing spot. And you know, looking through my own eyes, I don't think I'd ever go neutral on something that I didn't feel at least got me to a place of a degree of comfort. And you know, the hearings today are somewhat frustrating for me, Mr. Chairman and committee members, because I feel like this is being treated as the first time anyone's heard of this. And not in literal terms, but you know, a lot of the frustrations expressed today, I certainly wish would have been expressed to me much earlier. And while I'm still sympathetic to some of the perceived concerns out there, and I'm speaking mostly with the fees and the reimbursements, the access to rights of ways. I'm not speaking to the health component. I will touch on that as well. So I'm more than a little frustrated because there's some people that testify today that I have a profound level of respect for. And I know certainly that they acknowledge that I have an open door policy, and many folks, you know, have me on speed dial to that extent. So I'll leave it at that on that piece. You know, and the other, I believe, Representative or Vice Chair Lisinski, just down the way here, had posed a question, and I heard this answer. When we're looking at this legislation, this is, for me, it's not a question of whether or not we are going to allow and legitimize 5G technology in this state. And we'll continue to have debates upon the health aspects. The question for us is, do we want to create a streamlined process to allow for this deployment when Ohio and Indiana and many of our neighbors have already done so? And so that's the question before us. It's not if we support 5G, it's in what system and what infrastructure do we want to allow that deployment in the state of Michigan. And with regard to the health concerns today, my heart goes out to every individual that testified. That's really a really compelling piece of this, and I don't know how to address it other than the message that I heard was that wireless technology at any level is unsafe. We've been living with 5G. I have a 5 gigahertz router in my home, and we may be right. You may be right. I don't know, but I don't know that we can pull back time and go back to a period in our lives where we just remove wireless technology altogether. And so that's something I struggle with, but I do appreciate the testimony with regard to the health aspects. I can neither affirm or deny what's been said today, other than to say it was compelling.
Vice Chair Lisinski.
And just, Mr. Chair, may I fit one more point, if I may?
Sure.
And the other thing that I guess a question, and perhaps I could answer this within my own head, but I suggest all of you to think about as well, as we've got wireless technology potentially being deployed in a new and innovative way, and the other question is, should governments be in direct competition to companies within the private sector that are otherwise willing to provide that product, and I would say in a way in which is probably more affordably and more competitively deployed now and in the future, and most nimble to be able to remove and to change technology as those innovations change. So those are some of my reflections, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for the time.
Vice Chair Lisinski.
Thank you. Recognizing our hard stop at 10 a.m., I will make this brief. As we're looking at the FCC declaratory ruling, and as we look at the legislation that's before us, I respect the 1,200, 1,400, 2,000 municipalities that have participated through the MML and the MTA. The FCC declaratory ruling is silent in a number of areas that we have spoken to in this legislation, particularly in areas of removal of obsolete equipment within 45 days, in terms of the insurance that's required there, in terms, quite frankly, of the assurances that our local municipalities will be able to recover reasonable, non-discriminatory costs to ensure the safety and deployment of this technology. As a freshman legislator and having the honor of serving as the minority vice chair of this committee, I view this as the opening of a relationship with our townships and with the industry that's come before us and has worked over the last 6 months and in these work groups to provide for this legislation and in the testimony that's been given. It will be my understanding as I support this legislation that the terms of this legislation will be fully supported, the negotiated tenets in the areas where the FCC declaratory ruling is silent. The areas where the FCC declaratory ruling is silent are some of the most important areas to our local government to ensure that they have the ability in residential, downtown, and historic districts to ensure that this deployment meets local zoning requirements and meets what is expected in the communities. And so I will be over, if I am honored by the voters to return, expect the industry and others to abide by the agreements that we've come to here where the FCC declaratory ruling is silent. And so I look forward to that growing relationship and partnership and respect for our local communities and the deployment of this technology. Thank you.
For the record, we have 27 cards submitted today in support of the legislation and 194 cards submitted in opposition, but from people who either did not wish to testify or deferred their opposition. Seeing no further members of the committee, I'm going to offer some brief comment. I understand the industry's urgency. I'm going to offer some comment because it has to precede any motion that's coming. I understand the industry's urgency on this question. I'm personally not convinced that it's necessarily in the public interest. And I would bring to the committee's attention, just last week, the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that a mandatory smart meter policy violates the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So some of the folks, some of the things that have come before this committee, and the second example I was going to offer, you remember the two older guys who came and testified that some radiation was actually helpful, beneficial to your health? The Drudge Report had a headline last week from the Associated Press in which it reported that the Trump administration's EPA is adjusting the standards for radiation exposure to reflect that as a scientific fact. So some of the things that are brought before us that might at first blush be thought to be non-expert have since been found to have substance beyond what we might have initially given them. I'd simply say in conclusion, if not a stop sign, proceed with caution would be appropriate. But as you've often heard our Speaker of the House say, he's Speaker of the House, not dictator of the House, and I'm chairman of this committee. I'm not the dictator of this committee, and our democratic process allows the committee to do its work. I'd ask what is the pleasure of the committee. Representative Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion to report out Senate Bill 637, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this legislation.
At this point, members of the committee, debate about the merits is no longer in order. If there's some procedural question, it would be. Is there any debate? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Chairman Glenn?
No.
Representatives Houck?
Yes.
Barrett? Yes. Cole?
Yes.
Tedder?
Yes.
Bellino?
No.
Farrington?
Yes.
Griffin?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
LaFave?
Yes.
Lauer?
Yes.
Riley?
No.
Lisinski?
Yes.
Dianda?
Yes.
Garrett?
No.
Camilleri?
Yes.
Elder?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Sneller? Mr. Chair, you have 15 yeas, 4 nays, 0 pass. SB 637 is reported with recommendation.
Okay. Any other? Yes, Representative Lauer.
Yep, just like to make a motion to report out Senate Bill 894 with recommendation that it then pass.
Clerk will call the roll.
Chairman Glenn?
No.
Representatives Houck?
Yes.
Barrett?
Yes.
Cole?
Yes.
Tedder?
Yes.
Bellino?
No.
Farrington? Griffin?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
LaFave?
Yes.
Lauer?
Yes.
Riley?
No.
Lisinski?
Yes.
Dianda?
Yes.
Garrett?
No.
Camilleri?
Yes.
Elder?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Sneller?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 15 yeas, 4 nays, 0 pass. Senate Bill 894 is reported with recommendation.
We have no absent members to excuse, so no further business will come before the committee. The Energy Committee stands adjourned.